welcome to this edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. It is the afternoon of October 18th, 2013, and we have come upon a kind of momentary pause in the very acrimonious political battles going on here. We have had the momentary defeat of the fascist and reactionary factions of the Republican Party, but there is no victory, certainly not a victory for Obama or the Democrats, certainly not a victory for the American people. And we have to remember that the point of view that we use here for analysis of these matters is how to obtain the early extinction, the early obliteration, the early annihilation of the Republican Party. And naturally, that is not a goal in itself. It is only the prelude to the splitting of the Democratic Party into two parts, two factions there too, a Wall Street corporate plutocratic Democratic Party group. It's the heirs of the Clinton New Democrats, the New Democrats, or New Democratic Leadership Council people from the 80s and 90s on the one hand, but then there is also some kind of populist anti-Wall Street group in the Democratic Party. So we're interested in a two-phase renovation. And notice, this goes beyond what any group could do with its own resources or anything like this. It requires an attempt to manipulate or to guide, to serve as a catalyst for the entire transformation that's going on now. And this, one of the leading vehicles for this, of course, is the Tax Wall Street Party. The Tax Wall Street Party, which has mounted a very successful, very interesting campaign for mayor of New York. We'll get a further report on that later today here, and we will be exploring both the Randy Credico for mayor campaign, the Tax Wall Street Party campaign, in the today and in the coming weeks, up through and after the election, but also then the theoretical problems posed by how to create this, what can we call it? It wants to be a third party that becomes the majority very quickly, essentially by taking over the populist or anti-Wall Street, pro-labor part of the Democratic Party. So let us just look at the immediate situation. The American people have been horrified. They have felt a sentiment of revulsion at the reckless and irresponsible behavior of the Republicans, right? The people who used to say, government doesn't work, elect us, and we'll prove it to you. They have now gone way beyond that. They have now gone to forms of sociopathic behavior which really I don't think have precedents since about the time of the American Civil War, perhaps. The idea seems to be the Republicans say that their strength is that they don't care whether the country collapses or not. They are interested in an ideological agenda. This is always very dangerous. Ideological agendas are, generally speaking, not good, especially of this lunatic type that we're seeing. What you need is parties based on a rational estimate of one's own enlightened self-interest. But that, of course, is impossible for the Republicans. We'll get into the analysis of the Republican Party in a minute. But the people have now been horrified by this cynical willingness or even eagerness of the Republican Party to destroy the level of civilization that has been attained here on these shores in the last 250 years or more. They're more than willing to get rid of that, to dump it, to destroy it in the name of an abstraction, in the name of the free market of the Austrian school, the fight against big government, the fight against the social safety net, all of these synonymous with absolute cruelty and complete disregard for the welfare, even the lives of the average person, right? It is a party of sabotage. It's a party of extortion. It is a party of anarchists. It's a party of genocide, right? We've talked about the genocidal implications of the Ron Paul attack on the food stamp system in his Restore America budget of, about 2 years ago, October 2011. Ron Paul published that horrifying document. He wanted to cut the total expenditure on food stamps by 2/3. So from $1.50 per person per meal to 50 cents per person per meal. How many will die? Well, we'll see, right? We're still working on our death clock. And the kinds of austerity that are now being proposed are similar. And remember, we are not here to provide alibis for the Democratic Party. It's like 1941, right? If you say Germany first, you got to attack the most dangerous enemy first. Attack the Nazis and leave other kinds of fascism for later. That doesn't mean that you're pro Hirohito or pro-Japanese militarism. No. It simply means that you've got to have a rational estimate of how you fight your way out of a given situation. So the question of, who's worse in these parties, we leave to the academic hair splitters. The point is, how do you essentially transform this system? And, of course, we're always interested in avoiding civil war, since civil war is the worst possible outcome of any political situation. Here's the problem we have now. The federal government is probably going to stay open until February 15th. So we've got 3 months of, what can we say, a pause in the furious attack by these fascist Republicans. Again, the Republicans are always locked into their internal struggle between the traditional old-fashioned reactionaries, bad enough, and the modern fascists led by Ted Cruz, and then brought in with these various barbaric exponents of the Tea Party in the House, the 30 to 40 lunatics who are at the root of the problem. But, of course, behind them, the reason that they have so much clout is the billions of the Koch empire. It's Koch in the same way that Hitler couldn't have been Hitler without the money from ThyssenKrupp, from Schacht, and people like this. This whole Tea Party wouldn't work if you didn't have that Koch money machine, $200 million just to set up this last little crisis, right? So unlimited money thanks to the rats cabal, Roberts, Alito, Thomas, and Scalia, over at the Supreme Court. But the problem we have now is the 15th of February. From now to the 15th of February, we remain under Satan sandwich rules, the Satan sandwich of August 2011, when Obama capitulated in a fateful way to these lunatic ideologues. And that's bad news. And the sequester rolls on, right? The sequester increases from year to year, and the damage it does in gutting and hollowing out and destroying programs, the carnage at the National Institutes for Health, the Centers for Disease Control, and across the entire U.S. economy. That is what we now face. Then, of course, remember that the borrowing authority is likely to run out on around approximately January 7th, and that means we've still got a debt ceiling. One of the goals of this crisis was to end the concept of the debt ceiling. No more debt ceiling. It's unconstitutional, and that should have been one of the main goals of any negotiation to conclude this. So we're stuck with the Satan sandwich, the sequester, and the unconstitutional debt ceiling. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So we're stuck with Satan sandwich levels of spending. I think this is the infamous $988 billion in domestic discretionary and related spending. It's a category they throw around. Anyway, it's the 988. Even Obama, right-winger and austerity ghoul that he is, Obama had asked for $1,200 billion. So this is digging down, right? Remember, the level that we're now going to be under is virtually the level of the Paul Ryan, John Birch Society budget, right, of that particular sociopath from the defeated Wisconsin congressman who tried to pull into the White House with Mitt Romney. So we're stuck with those levels, and they are brutal. They are deadly. Austerity kills, and we'll be making that point every week in new forms. And of course, again, Obama asked for $1,200 billion. The Ryan number, I think, was 969. Sorry, and then eventually we're about $20 billion above that. That is absolutely brutal, and unfortunately, we're already hearing the voices of confusion. Right, the petty bourgeois, good government types, the people who are sure that there's a compromise point in the middle between the two parties, and can't they just get along? And you can't get along. I'm sorry to the petty bourgeoisie. When the petty bourgeoisie imagines that there's a point of compromise, what they're usually doing is projecting the interests of the petty bourgeoisie, as they see it, on that point and urging people to agree on something that will look good to the petty bourgeoisie and help them. It doesn't work that way. You must remember that things have become so skewed, right? In other words, the legal country here, the people who are in Congress and the Senate and the presidency and the executive departments and indeed the media, right, all this stuff, they no longer correspond to the real country, right? This is one of the concepts you get before the French Revolution, that the real country and the legal country are absolutely diverging, right? So that the political institutions are not indeed representative. So the point of all this being, though, that the point of theoretical compromise is actually well to the left of the Democratic Party. And remember this point. That is where the American people are. The American people want their economic rights fought for by centuries of labor struggle, in particular the sit-down strikes of 1936 and 1937, the labor struggles that led to the creation of the United Auto Workers, the United Steel Workers, the CIO, and so forth, and their economic rights: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, Head Start, WIC. We've gone through this list. Every one of them is critically important. That's the point of actual agreement. But, of course, you'll never hear that on these programs, because the programs and the parties operate in terms of an oligarchical, Washingtonocentric consensus. So that is why we get these stupid petty bourgeois ideas that if you could just get along, why not split the difference and meet in the center? That's fine, perhaps, among certain oligarchs, but the American people don't want any part of that. And that ultimately is the root of all the confusion that infects this system. Now, we're getting the petty bourgeoisie coming forward once again, working for people like Peter Peterson and God knows the rest of them, right? The various austerity ghouls and deficit hawks. They're all saying it's time to go back to the grand bargain, back to the grand bargain. And we say no, 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 no to the grand bargain. The grand bargain would include, for example, the chained consumer price index, which Obama put in his budget, the $1,200 billion of domestic discretionary. That's not what we're talking about now. We're talking about the Social Security escalator, the COLA. We're told that the COLA is already practically down to nothing this year, right? The cost of living escalator practically gone because they've cooked the books, obviously. So this is, if you want to look for government malfeasance, look at it here, that there's an oligarchical consensus that there should only be tiny increases in the cost of living escalator, which then affects the veterans benefits, disability benefits, and a slew of other important benefits upon which various people's lives depend always. Right? That's the difference with the Republicans is they're defending interests that are not life and death, whereas these other interests really are life and death. So no to the grand bargain. Think of the irony. Think of the absurdity. The Democratic Party and Obama were telling us last week that the Republicans were anarchists, that they were extremists, that they were right-wing radicals, liars. What else can we say? There was a well-deserved cascade of invective and epithets hurled at these reactionary and fascist Republicans. And that was all last week. Now we're supposed to look at this guy, Ryan, who was Count Dracula last week, and now he's a respected partner in negotiations for the unfortunate Senator Patty Murray, who looks like she's not decidedly against some kind of genocidal budget compromise. So we say no to the grand bargain. The description of the Republican Party that was offered last week is correct. They are anarchists. They are right-wing extremists. They are right-wing radicals. They are impossible to negotiate with, right? Boehner cannot deliver on any promise. He makes promises routinely and then reneges on them because he can't deliver his followers, right? These troglodytes, in particular, of the 30 to 40 of the Tea Party. You can't negotiate with them. It's impossible. No negotiation will be serious. So rather than attempt a grand bargain now, what you want to do is devote the year 2013 and 2014 to protracted political warfare with the purpose of destroying the Republican Party in place. And what that means is don't make any grand bargain. Maintain the conflict with the Republicans. Don't sell out your own base, right? It's always the case, right? After the Democratic Party gets its own base mobilized to fight back in these situations, then as soon as the Schumers and the Durbins and the Harry Reids decide that they're going to stop fighting, then the base is sold out. So no, we don't want that. Keep fighting. Wait until the Republicans collapse, and then you'll get a much better deal. So welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So in a nutshell, we're getting these voices for the grand bargain. We're getting the infamous duo Al Simpson and Erskine Bowles, right? Erskine Bowles, an investment banker, a right-wing, predatory Clinton Democrat, exactly what's wrong with the Democratic Party. And then we have the misanthrope, right, the hater of humanity, Al Simpson, who hates old people, hates children. It's amazing they let him out, right? They should go after him with a net. So they've been on television a lot, right? The Fix the Debt Coalition, paid for by the various Peter G. Peterson and so forth. They've all been out there demanding that it's finally time for the American people to give up their entitlements, to surrender their economic rights, one under the New Deal, a new round of killer austerity to placate these same people who we were told were basically enemies of humanity and enemies of the American people the previous week. And they are, of course. And the Republicans, the leaders of the Tea Party and so forth, all enemies of the American people, enemies of humanity, no doubt about it. But let us now conclude, once you've got them on the ropes, once you've got them down, it's time to wipe them out. There should not be a Republican Party. The Republican Party, to use the language of its own initial platform of 1856, they said there are two relics of barbarism, slavery and polygamy, right? And the Republican Party today is one big relic of barbarism, of Confederate low-wage, anti-human thinking. So why prop them up with a deal? You don't need a deal. As Obama says, the deficit is coming down. There is no real pressure on this front. Don't make a deal with them. Rather, string them along, and let's see if it's not possible to begin wiping them out in the November election of 2014, because what we have today is an anomalous situation, right? This is the situation created in 2010 and 2012 by the backlash against Obama, right, which was a lot of it had to do with the horrors of Obama and the Trilateral Commission and people like this. So no grand bargain. Stall them until they collapse, and then you'll get a much better grand bargain. You won't need a grand bargain. At that point, you can get to the business of the Wall Street sales tax. Yes, indeed. Run in 2014 on the Wall Street sales tax and increasing Social Security, increasing these pensions. The argument being that 2008, 2009, the crimes of Wall Street led to the destruction of many people's retirement savings, and that has now got to be supplemented. All right. So the other interesting thing is the rollout of Obamacare. Right now, let's just put this in a little bit of historical context. With Obamacare, you're dealing with two kinds of portals, right? Two kinds of websites, right, of the sort of kayak type. And one of these is for individual states, right? California has one, Maryland has one, New York has one, so forth. And then there's the federal one. And the first obvious tactic of the reactionary Republicans, right, the party of national sabotage and wrecking, right, always rooting for the United States to fail, always anti-national, right, always eager for U.S. defeats, right? They love things like Benghazi, right? It's Christmas. If September 11th, 2001 was the neocon Christmas, then for these Tea Party reactionaries, then September 11th of 2012 was Christmas for these Tea Party lunatics. But let's look at it. You have a situation, first of all, in which about 35, 36 reactionary Republican governors refuse to set up their own websites so that people in their states can buy these policies, right? They can sign up for the health care, this time without having to be stopped by the pre-existing condition. So I would say, first of all, if the one, and it means that 35 states all go to one federal exchange, The general idea is that the websites set up for individual states are working on the whole well, with some exceptions. In other words, California doing quite well, Kentucky doing quite well, some other states not so well. But this is sort of within the boundaries of normalcy, I guess you'd say, of the statistical likelihoods of these things happening. But the obvious thing is sabotage, a denial of service attack. I must say, this was quite a day here on National Pentagon Radio on the Diane Rehm show. It turns out for the first time in their lives, these center garks, or left-of-center garks, I guess, of National Public Radio, are willing to entertain the idea of a conspiracy. Is it true that we find now that Diane Rehm has been hearing all week that the difficulties of the exchanges are a conscious, deliberate, organized plot, a conspiracy by the reactionary Republicans to do denial of service attacks, to overload them, to sabotage them, and so forth? I would add the other obvious thing is infiltration of saboteurs and wreckers, right? Sabotaging the United States is the stock in trade of these Tea Party and other Republicans. So I would say First, look at the governors who refused to create the exchanges for their own states, right? Meaning the 35 states, some of them quite large, Texas and all this. That all goes to one federal exchange, which is obviously then vulnerable to overloading. How about infiltrating in some of these sort of autistic types who, libertarians, right? Maybe Peter Thiel had some friends from the libertarian camp who decided to go to work for these exchanges, and maybe they saw that things were not quite right, and they made sure that they stayed wrong. Something like this. What do I know? I don't know, but that's certainly within the realm of possibility. And then a denial of service attack. Now, remember who you're dealing with. Karl Rove, Koch. If the Koch brothers were willing to spend $200 million in order to get this crisis going, right? In order to shut down the government, and they hoped get close to defaulting, the national bankruptcy of the United States, right? To shut down federal borrowing by the method of bankruptcy, right? An extra legal procedure. Is anybody seriously going to argue that the Karl Roves and Koch brothers of the world would be, indignant if they were told that, if they were asked, right? Hey, did you have anything to do with the way this stuff failed? Did you have a hand in it? Was there any inspiration from you? And I'm very interested to see that all of our libertarian friends, all the reactionaries who now call themselves libertarians, there's never a hint that that could be the case. Oh, no. This is all sociological phenomenon. This is all authentic, right? There is no other level, right? There is no a possibility of delving beneath the surface of events, right, to find out. It's all a coincidence, or better yet, it's because Obama is incompetent. The other thing I would say about this is the people who built these exchanges, right, these portals, that's the private sector. Those are all government contractors now. There's no government department that has a computer science capability. And that's a shame. I would say what this actually shows is if you're the government, you better have your own in-house permanent computer science division that can create things reliably. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now, in the midst of all this, let's go to the immediate fighting front, which is, of course, New York City, as we mentioned before. And here we have the Tax Wall Street Party candidate Randy Credico demanding a 0.5% tax on all Wall Street turnover to be collected by the city of New York, and that be used for the main necessary reforms in areas like education, public health, public housing, jobs, job creation, and so forth. So let's, as usual, go to our correspondent for these important facts of New York City politics, Daniela Walls. Welcome, Daniela.
Hi, Webster.
How you doing?
Good. At the moment, we're out on the streets of New York passing out flyers every day and in every borough. So if people want to join us, even last minute, call Chris Reese, our on-ground organizer, at 908-433-3266, and he'll give you the team's location, or you can come pick up flyers from Chris and pass them out in your own neighborhood. So that's what we're doing. We're running all around town, putting up as many flyers in as many obvious locations as possible. At the moment, our campaign is surviving day to day on people's generous donations, mostly from your listeners, Webster. So please visit Randy's website, Credico2013.org, and if possible, make another donation. We won't be bugging you much longer for this. There are only 3 more weeks left to go, and we can't thank you guys enough for what you've given so far. Supporters can be of tremendous help now by posting as many comments as possible on recent articles pertaining to the New York City mayoral election. Most of these cities' big news sites, which literally have hundreds of thousands of daily readers and whose reporters have totally blacked out Randy, they allow for online comments under the articles, and it would be a great way to spread the word about Randy's candidacy.
What would be some of the sites that they should visit and start talking up in favor of Credico, get into fights with trolls?
Off the top of my head, the Village Voice, the Wall Street Journal, AM New York, Crane's Business, Capital New York, Metro New York, Politicker.com is one, Newsday, New York Magazine, The New Yorker, The New York Observer, The New York Times Magazine. I don't know if I already mentioned The New York Times itself,
right,
and other ones that I can't remember, but
how about that Politicus? Politicus had something reasonable about Credico.
Politicus had a great thing about Credico. It just doesn't have as many readers as these major dailies that have hundreds of thousands and millions. So right now, we're just trying to get the word out as quickly as possible to as many people. So you can write comments in the areas under the articles and post his name and a link to his website, Credico2013.org. You have to be a little crafty about this because sometimes these big magazines don't allow for links. So you have to write it out, Credico 2013. And I always write space DOT space ORG, and it seems to take. Or a link to the Tax Wall Street Party website, same thing. Write it out in a cryptic way, but so the readers know, and alert New Yorkers that Randy is in the race.
And I would say, listen, about this, right? People who are so concerned about their privacy, how about this? The fact that we've got, the suppression of First Amendment rights to express political speech by these corporate and intelligence community influenced websites. Time to fight them.
So hit them in the comment section. That's what we're trying to find, any little inroads. Also, if you know anybody in New York City and you can call them, I've been harassing all my friends. I have friends out of town and friends in Europe who are calling anybody they know in New York and reminding them to vote for Randy on November 5th. The bottom line is that we need to reach as many New Yorkers as possible between now and November 5th. That's 3 weeks. Everyone's urgent and creative help is deeply appreciated and can make all the difference. Think of anything you can do. The goal is to reach New Yorkers. Webster, you told me you wanted us to buy more 30-second ads on Spanish radio, but we're totally out of money this week to do that.
Okay, well, then maybe our listeners can, consider the tremendous effect you can get from these 30-second radio spots on, certainly English, certainly Spanish, and maybe others, because it's New York after all, right? And I think that's always been a very, very cost-effective method. So I hope that people will you're going to give them the contact information now. I hope they'll consider that because this is where the action is, right? If you're sick of Southern Republicans going wild, well then the only way to attack counterattack is get Wall Street, hit them in the La Banza, right, where they have to pay.
Speaking of the Republicans going wild, LaHoda came out with a crazy campaign ad this week. Webster, it's all about how if de Blasio gets elected, crime is going to be rampant. There's going to be, he said there's going to be, they showed all these dead bodies everywhere and dead bodies in the street. It was really wacky and it's.
Daniela, you're breaking up a little bit. Maybe you just want to repeat that last sentence. Hello. Okay, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty, but you get the idea. Now, I also want to repeat what we began talking about last week, right? The Daily Beast, right? These decadent characters, right? I think it's still what's her name there? The British woman who loves the royal family so much, Tina Brown. They're running a story. Hang on, I've just got to give you a lead in now. They're running this story about the new left, and they're trying to tell us that de Blasio is the new left, and he's there to dupe the millennials who have had a rough time in life because they came on the scene in the aughties and now into the teens, and they've had a very rough time economically. They're crushed by student loan debt, right? These are the people who were represented very heavily in Occupy, and somehow they want to channel that into the de Blasio campaign, and he's a Soros clone, right?
Exactly. I have some stuff about that millennial article.
Go right ahead.
I wanted to tell you real quick about this crazy LaHoda ad. It was like Lee Atwater has come back from the grave, and it's the exact same as that famous Willie Horton ad. You remember that? from George Bush Sr.'s 1988 presidential campaign. Anyway, it just came out and it shocked everybody, and people thought, "What is this guy doing?" if YouTubers, if listeners want to see it, they can YouTube and search Joe LaHoda "Can't Go Back." Anyway, it sounds like a bad disco title, but that's the that's what he did this week, and it's very, very funny. You were talking about that article in the Daily Beast about the millennials.
Yeah, just the phenomenon, right?
Okay.
That there are basically you've got the millennials who seem to be radicalizing left, and right on time, the left wing of Wall Street, otherwise known as Soros, is there with a demagogic, second. It's like going back for a second bite at the Obama apple. So you've got somebody who's got some vague leftist, ultra-leftist coloration, and you're supposed to support them. But in reality, this is just more of the same Wall Street class dictatorship.
Well, Soros and his ilk do market studies on this stuff, right? And they know this demographic is coming. So all they're doing is trying to co-opt this energy. And the article talks about the compromises that Clinton and Obama made with the axioms of how Wall Street influence in politics are going to be challenged by the millennials, young Americans who have grown up in tougher economic circumstances than their parents, leading them to question the basic way the American economic system is working. And I'm one of these group, sort of, a couple of years off. But this is this is my group. I culled through a lot of that propaganda in that article because, you don't adore the source. But some of the demographic experts were saying was interesting and relevant, I think. Like, unlike their grandparents, these millennials have never been exposed to a real working economic agenda, Webster. That's the economic agenda that you've written in your 5-point plan and that we have at the Tax Wall Street Party. But they've never been exposed to it. Occupy never had that.
Right. Occupy, of course, was designed to trap them in a hopeless, blind alley. And the other thing about these so-called millennials is that they've never seen actual left opposition. They've never seen militant trade union action combining with political strikes and things like this. All stuff that's on the agenda for now. Daniela will be back in just a second. We got another 10 minutes, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Our second hour is October 18th, 2013, and we've just had the federal government start up and the national bankruptcy be narrowly avoided. And we're talking with Daniela Walls about this phenomenon in New York City. The millennial generation, those born between about 1981 and 2001, seem to be breaking left, potentially New Deal. But, of course, what does left mean to them? What's the content of left? And will they be duped again? Because one of the things about the millennials we have to also note, their debut on the political scene was as dupes of Obama. So they were duped in 2008. They were much less duped in 2012. So are they evolving towards a greater sense of reality? And this is exactly where the Tax Wall Street Party wants to intervene. We want to give them an alternative to the de Blasio campaign controlled by Soros. And, of course, we can't compete with Soros's millions and billions, but what we can do is to try to recruit cadre, organic mass leaders who can see the fraud and the swindle that's going on, right? There were the fraud and the swindle that was unfortunately used to destroy Occupy Wall Street, and now these people are supposed to be locked in for another decade into the de Blasio machine. So tell us more, Daniela.
We are looking for cadre. We have a social network that we set up for founders. It's a private network, and if you'd like to be invited, please email me at taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. And it's just like Facebook, easy to navigate, and we're working out a lot of the details. And so these people, these millennials, I have faith in them, Webster. I'm one of them, like I said. It's just that I'm on the older end, so I remember my dad's big company being a big union that was busted. But a lot of these people have never been exposed to a real working economic agenda or large organized labor. But they are intuiting it. And Occupy never had anything organized. And that is where the Tax Wall Street Party can come in now and fill this void, giving them economic fundamentals to allow them to hopefully have at least the same sort of working lives their parents had, and hopefully even better. If they want a future that is not filled with economic uncertainty, we have the program, and I urge people to go and read it at taxwallstreetparty.org under program. Maybe we have the only comprehensive and realistic program out there now. Demographic experts were saying in this article that the left millennials will be at least 1/3. I don't know if you've already said this, but 1/3 of the electorate by 2016. That's huge. And it's a quickly growing demographic, getting larger and larger each year. They're entering the workforce making less than their parents made, entering the same jobs, and there's fewer opportunities, and they're coming in with lots of debt. So these guys are leaning much further to the left than previous generations on economic issues. 2/3 of the millennials favor a larger government with more services than a smaller one with fewer services. They're not buying into the limited government philosophy, even though the libertarian alternative media might yell and have you think that everyone is going Randian or Koch brothers. It isn't the case. The poll numbers just show you that it isn't the case. These millennials are fueled by frustration, Webster. They want a big government to come in and regulate these guys, for government to do something. To make this a level playing field.
Daniela, that is of tremendous importance, right? Because all the bankrupt libertarians have been spouting the line that Ron Paul and little Rand have extended their hypnotic influence over the millennials, and somehow that this generation, when they abreact against the fact that Obama betrayed them, they're going to flock to the banner of Ron Paul and the libertarians, and we've even had articles about this in the Washington Post. It's not true, as you say, right? That this group is still up for grabs.
That kind of stuff might be interesting or entertaining to listen to, but it's not. We're smarter than that, and we can see that that's not going to be helpful. The Blasio one in New York is something that the future Tax Wall Street Party candidates for Congress that we have now are going to have to point a finger to and say, well, how did that work out for you? We might need a few more of these guys, like you were saying, these letdown artists like Obama and de Blasio to disappoint us. But before we realize that we need a real economic program and really keep our eye on that to combat this financial dictatorship we're under, one day we are going to realize that there is a need to stop voting for the George Soros Wall Street funded candidates. And I have faith that my generation is going to wake up and stop being duped. This favoring a bigger government hasn't happened since FDR. It's getting easier to think big government is the enemy. In some cases, with the growing police state stuff and the Monsanto stuff and all the wars. But that's our government, Webster, usurped by Wall Street and private interests and private contractors. A lot of this NSA stuff is private contract stuff.
Sure.
What the millennials coming in are interested in is the good stuff, like massive public works programs and infrastructure spending. They are much more pro-union than we've ever seen before, and that's interesting. Not being exposed to big unions. That's just interesting that they're intuiting that too. And it is our job now at the Tax Wall Street Party to educate them about a national bank and expanding public credit through a nationalized Federal Reserve to make these things a reality. They also favor single-payer health care. Increasing the minimum wage is a big one because a lot of them are making close to the minimum wage or the minimum wage. Right. Zero or low-interest student loans financed by the Federal Reserve because we're all in student loan debt, and a big overhaul in regulation. They, more than anybody, want the government to come in, and this is why I use the word big government, which is fearful to some people, but they want the government to come in and start a meaningful regulation of these financial markets. In our Tax Wall Street platform, besides the 1% Wall Street sales tax and nationalizing the Fed, we call for a bunch of regulations, ending all bailouts of banks and financial institutions, clawing back the TARP and other public money given or lent to financiers, abolishing the notion of too big to fail. J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and other Wall Street zombie-backed banks are insolvent and must be seized by the FDIC for Chapter 7 liquidation, with derivatives eliminated by triage, reinstating Glass-Steagall, the Glass-Steagall firewall to separate banks, brokerages, and insurance, banning credit default swaps, CDOs. I'll just structured investment vehicles, commodity index swaps, and exchange-traded funds based on synthetic commodity futures, setting up a 15% reserve requirement for all OTC derivatives, setting a 10% maximum rate of interest on credit cards and payday loans, restore state and federal anti-usury laws, ban adjustable rate mortgages, re-regulate commodities markets with 100% margin requirements, position limits, and anti-speculation protections for hedgers, and protect consumers to prevent oil, gasoline, food price spikes, and restore individuals. Chapter 11.
You've covered most of the bases, just about all of them.
Yeah, I just did cover all of the regulation I covered. Sorry if I rambled. I just wanted to get that out there. Hello?
Yes, keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
So there's a new trend starting in America of centrist politicians being presented by the media as progressive, right? So we had that with Obama, he was a centrist. Now we have that with de Blasio. They're presenting them more and more as more and more progressive or further to the left. We're seeing that with Janet Yellen and Cory Booker are being presented to the public as progressives. They pander to the left on the social issues, but are ultra-right in terms of their economics.
Right.
All the emphasis on social issues steals attention from bankers, and our tax Wall Street Party, Webster, attacks bankers, and only bankers. Whatever your social issues are, that's your business. Our business is recovering the economic rights of the American people. Randy has an economic policy that is legitimately progressive. That is the difference between Randy and de Blasio, where everybody perceives de Blasio as progressive and left-leaning. His economics really are not.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're gonna what can we say? We're gonna recruit some of the smartest people who can see through the fraud of de Blasio and go on from there to have a national tax Wall Street party. We'll see you next week, Daniela.
Come join us. TaxWallStreetParty@gmail. Email me. Thank you, Webster.
Okay, and we'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, we're going to take the rest of our program to talk about the sociological phenomena that we have seen. One of the effects of the debt crisis, right, the artificially created government shutdown, right, a gambit of these reactionary to fascist Republicans, and then of the threat of national bankruptcy, of the first default in U.S. history. This has shocked people into asking themselves, what is this Republican Party? Why do we have this? Where do these people come from? From under what rock do they crawl? And, what are we going to do about this, right? And then there's also a broader question of U.S. sociology. I would say for some people it also includes this question about the party system at any given time, the party realignment, and similar factors, right? How the various groups inside the Republican Party don't get along. Let's just do that part first. And you'll see that there are several levels of analysis. There is, of course, demographics, and then there's this generational stuff. Let me just caveat the generational stuff. The most important influence, and I say influence, it doesn't determine, but it influences. It impels, but it does not compel. The most important influence on people is class, socioeconomic class, political class, things like this. Generational considerations are there, but it is important to see that various Wall Street financiers, and we're going to see some in a minute, various Wall Street financiers are interested in convincing you of the validity of generational analysis over class analysis. They would say generation analysis trumps class analysis. Well, no. Class analysis is still primary, even though we obviously want to keep our eyes open and accept whatever important insights we can get from this generational stuff. And then we just have to look at various opinion groups. So we basically have a multi-leveled analysis of what's going on. The most obvious thing is this now. The crisis of the Republican Party, right, the war, the civil war of these Republican reactionaries, right, what is this? Well, the Republican Party, traditionally 3 groups and then lately 4 groups, right? The Republican Party, first of all, Wall Street money men, the corporate power elite. And this is where the money for the Republican Party comes from Wall Street. And, of course, Obama's ability to take the White House was because of his ability to outdo McCain in his fundraising precisely among the Wall Street and corporate financier elite. So that's number one. In terms of getting people on the ground, volunteers, party activists, and so forth, these, believe it or not, are the evangelical Christians, right? The fundies, probably about 2/3 of them Protestant, but 1/3 of them Catholic, and that is a very important group right now. Again, parenthetically, the activity of Pope Francis Bergoglio is now hitting the Republican Party very hard among evangelicals who have been taught to believe that the essence of Christianity is that you don't like gays, you don't like homosexuals, you don't like contraception, you don't like abortion. That's supposed to be Christianity from the point of view of some of these rather demagogic evangelical Christians of the Catholic side, Protestant too. But that is now called into question by Bergoglio. Another element, an ideological crisis for the Republicans from an unexpected quarter. And remember also that the evangelical Christians are, to a large degree, people, there's no other way to put it, whose minds were impaired, who were impacted by the drug culture of the 1960s and the 1970s. An interesting article by, I forget the author, but in Harper's Magazine a couple of months ago, very interesting article about how the flower children of Haight-Ashbury, to large numbers of them, not all, but certainly large numbers, turned into evangelical Christians, how abortion was a central issue there. So these are the people that in Iowa and many other states provide the numbers. And then you've got another elite group, the neocons. And these neocons, of course, warmongers. They're, very concerned about the foreign policy interests of Israel. They're interested in having an anti-Arab and generally xenophobic foreign policy. But then, challenging all of these, somehow not fitting in but being there, are the libertarians, the libertines, and anarchists. The stoners, if you want. In other words, these are the same kinds of drug culture devotees, but they have not gone in the direction of Christian evangelical teaching, but they've stayed libertarian and libertine, and they want to act out their drug culture. So that leaves anarchists. The problem now is this: as long as the libertarians and the libertines were mainly concerned with their own lifestyles, there's no problem. Wall Street, Koch, all these people, Soros, in particular, they're delighted to have people engaged in all kinds of debauchery, narcotics, whatever you want. They're just delighted to have this. These are all basically forms of consumer existence, so they pose no challenge whatever to the system. But once you get the Austrian school and the notions of von Hayek and von Mises coming in, and the anti-government anarchist view, as we've seen it now, this is a very big problem for the Wall Street people, and it's also a big problem for the neocons. The neocons are interested in a warfare state. These libertarians don't want that, and the Wall Street people want essentially they want the society to be organized around the needs of Wall Street greed, and sometimes that doesn't work, right? The first vote on the TARP, and now more recently the willingness, the eagerness of some of these 30 to 40 Republican fascists to bring down the public debt of the United States. This is a direct threat to the racket which the Wall Street and corporate people have been profitably pursuing. Right. So Koch is not happy, and the Israeli-oriented neocons, AIPAC, and so forth, they're not happy either. So you can see that the Republican coalition is exploding. In other words, the introduction of the libertines means that there's big trouble among the various Republican factions. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So that's the breakup of the Republican Party according to political factions, right? According to opinion groups and think tanks, other kinds of factions, right? The Wall Street corporate power elite, the money men, can't get along with the libertarian anarchist types because they have threatened to destroy the Treasury bond market upon which the entire Wall Street operation, the dollar, is based. And then you've got the evangelical Christians who had been vegetating away. There's now a lot of attrition thanks to what Pope Francis has been doing, saying you've got to be concerned about the poor. Wait a minute. These are the evangelical Christians. They're not interested in that. They want to hear vindictive Jeremiads against gays, abortion, contraception, and all the rest of it. Right. So that part is in crisis. And again, these people are they've battened on to a very strange version of Christianity. Then, of course, the neocons, the warmonger group, they can't get along with those libertarian libertines either, and the anarchism and the anti-war sentiment. So this is all in the process of breaking up. Now, that's opinion, right? Those are the opinion group. Now, remember, as I said before, the Strauss-Howe, and those are the two people who did this, the Strauss-Howe analysis is a system of manipulation and, above all, of getting people to buy things. And remember, Peter G. Peterson, this bum, is the main austerity ghoul. He was the head of Lehman Brothers. He was the head of the New York Fed. He seems to have been responsible for putting Geithner in there as president of the New York Fed. This is a very bad thing, but with Peterson, he has tried to instill into this class analysis this idea you can say whatever you want, but when you get to the baby boomers, make it clear that their historical task is to commit suicide, right, Harry Carey, by demanding that their Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and so forth be taken away. Because according to this Peterson, the cause of the 2008 and every other financial crisis is that the government debt is too big, and the reason for that is the New Deal entitlements. So this is the fundamental class consciousness of the Wall Street financier elite. And if you are going around saying, if you're parroting this line, down with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, this is dependency, food stamps are slavery, congratulations, you're working for Peter G. Peterson of Lehman Brothers and the New York Fed, even though you're probably too dumb to realize that effect. So now we're left with these generations, right? The baby boomers, well, the great moment there was the opposition to the war in Vietnam. Actually, before them, we have the silent generation, right? Born between, 1925 and 1945. The silent generation, heavily impacted by McCarthyism, driven into silence by the climate of ideological terrorism and fear from that Wisconsin senator, whose background is very similar to Paul Ryan's, and who actually looked very much like Cruz. So the silence, the baby boomers. And again, I want to stress, the principal category of interpretation is class. But again, you don't want to close your eyes to whatever benefit this generational analysis can bring. The Xers born between the Kennedy assassination and the beginning of the Reagan presidency, 63 to 81. There's a time of complete chaos, breakdown of society. They are the abreaction in many cases against that. And as has been pointed out, the Xers, those born between 63 and 81, they support wars. They have a social Darwinist weakness, let us say. They supported the Iraq War, #1, the Gulf War, the Afghan War, the Iraq War number 2. They somehow have seen the world as a jungle, and this has infected them with that idea. So this is a problem. They're similar to the Lost Generation, right? The Lost Generation were the people who fought in the trenches of World War I and then ended up, some of them ended up in Paris in the 1920s. A lot of them, like Mussolini, Hitler, and so forth, ended up in the fascist movements of Europe. All right, now, in terms of class analysis, class this time, what we see in the Republican Party is, as I said last time, the petty bourgeois middle class, the people who have been frightened, impacted, impoverished, they fear losing their lifestyle as a result of the 2008-2009 world derivatives panic. This is the principal group of the Tea Party. The Tea Party is largely brokers, stockbrokers, insurance brokers, real estate brokers. They are therefore people who are attached to the lower extremities of the finance capital system, and they feel threatened. The system is not working for them. They feel that it should. They have a right, they would say, to continuing remuneration, right? They're afraid of losing their status, precipitating into the working class or lumpen proletariat. They're radicalized to the right by fear, and you got to have some compassion for them, but this stuff gets ugly pretty fast. There's also the question of veterans, right? People who have spent a lot of time qualifying for Pentagon TRICARE and don't want to see other people elbowing their way in there and taking any or undermining any of that coverage. That's the Tea Party. It is poujadisme, if you will. It's the petty bourgeoisie terrified by the crisis, moving right, blaming ethnic groups quite frequently, and otherwise, not capable of coming up with a real analysis of this situation. Now, that leaves the millennials that we talked about before. And the hope is that the millennials may be radicalizing left. Again, the debut of the millennials was to be duped by Obama in 2008. Some of them then, I think, went for Obama in 2012 with fewer illusions, maybe more realistically saying, well, Romney is worse. Yeah, Romney was worse, so that's not so bad. And in 2008, they would argue there was no alternative. This is the youth bulge that the CIA has been aware of. This is the Arab Spring, and the whole WikiLeaks phenomenon was designed. It was tailored to try to reassert ideological control over this youth bulge. And again, the problem is if they're radicalizing left, what do they think of as left? Is it gay rights, gun control, whatever it is? In other words, is it the old wedge issues being played in reverse? Or starting from the fact of economic hardship, right, of the $1 trillion of student loans, it can be pro-labor. So the millennials show important pro-labor tendencies. They are not anti-government. They're open and even sympathetic to what would be called big government by the reactionaries. Interestingly, the millennials don't like Ted Cruz. They don't like the Tea Party. Those people are bigots, right? They're fanatics. They're ideologues. Millennials don't like that. Now, here's an interesting attempt. As I told you, Peter G. Peterson is trying hard to convoy the millennials into the camp of these ultra-left fakers, the de Blasio's, Cory Booker, who got elected this week, Janet Yellen, Julian Castro. We mentioned them. How about this? This is the American Prospect, Robert Kuttner. The column is called Tom Friedman's Worst Column Ever. And Tom Friedman, of course, is a New York Times columnist. He is one of the stupidest, most superficial, most venal. He's for sale, supported the Iraq War, absolutely for attacking Iraq until that became unpopular and then found a reason. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. You know, at any given time, the talking heads on cable television and even network discussion programs have a repertoire of maybe 25, 30 different prepackaged lines that they incessantly repeat. And one of the ones is if you're a friend of the reactionary Republicans, specifically, you're going to be arguing these days, well, yeah, the Republican Party in Washington, D.C. is a monstrosity. Well, it's not. It's dysfunctional. We have these Tea Party people. They're ideologues. They're somewhat fanatical and all the rest of it. But, in the states, we have wonderful Republicans in the states, right? Yoho the Yahoo may be wrecking Washington, D.C., and Cruz and Mike Lee and Little Rand. But, okay, forget them. We've got these wonderful governors. Now, of course, what they're talking about is people, I guess if we wanted to coin a term for them, what should we say? The little Mussolinis? I guess we better save the greater comparison for some later time when we may need it. But the little Mussolinis, and of course it means the union-busting Governor Walker of Wisconsin, the union-busting Mitch Daniels of Indiana, the dictatorial union buster Snyder of Michigan, Kasich of Ohio, who was dealt a significant rebuff in a referendum in the 2012 November elections, and you get the idea. The people that they say, we're so excited, various commentators come to mind. We don't need to go through them. But Peggy Noonan, right, the former speechwriter for stupid Reagan, comes out and says, we have these wonderful governors in these states. Well, these people, of course, monsters, and those comparisons are brought out because most people don't know the horrors of living under Scott in Florida or Kasich or Walker or Mitch Daniels, now replaced by Pence. Pence, of course, coming from precisely this group of extremist anarchists in the House Republican caucus. So forget about that, right? Forget the idea that the Republicans have some tremendous pool of talent among the governors. Those guys have made records, which I would say it's going to be, and Christie, of course, union buster, looting of schools and all the rest of it. It's going to be very hard to turn to them. But let's continue with our analysis. Now, demographically, we know the upshot, right? It is that the Republican Party is not favored by the percentage growth of Latinos and Asian immigrants in the U.S. population. Let's just explain why, right? We have these party alignments or party systems. We had the New Deal party alignment from 1932 to 1968. And notice that when these things end, they end with some convulsions, right? The Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968, the student movement, the occupation of many, many campuses in 69 and 70, and so forth, right? So the Nixon presidency, Watergate, it's a time of great upheaval when a party system ends and switches then to its successor. So after the New Deal system of 32 to 68, we've now got the Southern strategy of 68 to 2008. And what is this? It's based on low wages, a decline of the living standard, the busting of unions. It also sees the United States losing all the foreign wars, maybe winning in some abstract sense, overthrowing Saddam Hussein, but nevertheless a war which most people would say was absolutely lost. So basically a time of domestic and international failure, right? No glory, only defeat, debacle, decline, and so forth. The demographic basis of the Southern strategy was this. what people like Lee Atwater had found, or certainly the Kevin Phillips book on the emerging Republican majority, they would point out that if you can control the South, right, the population of the American South, the former Confederate States of America, if you can appeal to white men, angry white men experiencing backlash against the student movement, against black power, against the civil rights laws, against union power, and so forth, that's important. And then the evangelical Christians that we mentioned before, many of them Calvinists, with therefore the mindset that comes from this. Then you've got the neocons, right, an elite group, important because that's your foreign policy, and that's also a source of big money. So the South, white men, evangelical Christians, neocons, and so forth. This defined a system of power, right, where the only Democratic presidents, people like Carter and Clinton, tended to come from the southern states, where Tony Coelho, let's not forget him, Coelho of the Democratic House group, found that it wasn't worth catering to labor and other mass organizations because the Democrats could go and raise money for television just as easily as the Republicans, so why not go out and do it? And this, of course, the Southern strategy with this subservient, broken Democratic Party. This is what Chris Matthews tries to idealize in his stories about Reagan and Tip O'Neill and how they got along. Yeah, because Tip O'Neill was a wretched, miserable excuse for an opposition leader. I'd love to debate Chris Matthews about them. But now the point is demographic changes mean that precisely these groups, South, white men, evangelical Christians, neocons, the neocons deprived by war weariness and by the disgust of the consequences of aggression, these groups are deprived of their centrality. So they feel that they're losing demographically and ethnically. They're losing ideologically. They're losing theologically. They're losing in terms of the Electoral College, right? So this is the total status panic of these white men. Now, the problem is that this will not sell, right? The vindictive, militant, reactionary politics that are portrayed by the Republican Party are not generally acceptable. People don't want to hear it. It's a loser. And that is what we saw this week. Now, let's get back to Robert Kuttner and Tom Friedman's worst column. This is an attempt to try to save the Republicans on the part of certain financiers, not Kuttner, he's attacking it, but certain financiers by convincing the millennials that they should go into a generational warfare. So Thomas Friedman writes, sorry, kids, we ate it all. And the idea is those greedy baby boomers and those ne'er-do-well Generation Xers kids have stolen your trust fund. And it turns out that the leading light of this is Stanley Druckenmiller. And Stanley Druckenmiller is nothing but the former partner of George Soros. And back in the 1995-96 government shutdown, Druckenmiller, I called him Drunkenmiller, Drunkenmiller, hedge fund billionaire, predator, hedge fund hyena, just like Soros, he, as Kuttner says, he has now he's appointed himself as the Paul Revere of deficit reduction. And he goes to campuses and he says, kids, they're stealing your nest egg, right? You got to go out and fight. You got to cut those baby boomers and those Xers off. And the champion of the millennials is Stanley Druckenmiller. And of course, the debt that he's interested in talking about is government debt. Never talks about student loan debt. Got no solution for that. And he wants to tell you that the enemies are seniors, Wall Street, and unions. And you tell me which of those three doesn't fit with the others, seniors, Wall Street, and unions. So watch out for Soros. Watch out for his old partner, Druckenmiller. Watch out for these people. And we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio.